My name is Adam Marsh. I am joined by my Cine-Lit resident expert, Darrell Buxton. How are you doing, Darrell?
I'm great, Adam. Thanks.
Are you ready to break free of these chains of lockdown and embrace the world again?
I just want to get back to the movies.
Yeah, it's difficult, isn't it? We're on lockdown, and what we've got to do is sit and watch movies all day. And as soon as we're out of lockdown, I want to go out and watch movies all day. So
sure, be nice to see them back on the big screen, though. So
hopefully that'll be sooner rather than later. But today we're hooking back up again to discuss a relatively unknown name in cinema. I'm not sure everyone knows exactly who he is, even though he's directed over 40 films. We're going to be talking about Brian Trenchard-Smith.
Hey.
There you go. So I'm not sure. I can't get a handle on how well known he is. What's your thoughts on it, Darrell?
I think people probably know some of his films better than they know him. Even then, he's a bit of a niche, a bit of a cult. But people are interested in Australian cinema, and if you've seen that documentary, Not Quite Hollywood, he's all over that, and he's a big part of that sort of 70s movement in Australian sort of new cinema. So he's quite an important figure. Yeah, someone who maybe his films are better known than he is. Okay, cool. And like I say, even then, I'm not sure how well known his films are. Yeah, not at high level. Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to structure this by picking out 5 films that we think maybe sum up his career in a concise way. Because the man's directed over 40 movies, loads of TV shows. He's a very prolific director over his 40 plus years directing films. So we've chosen 5 movies, which we're going to discuss, and hopefully we'll bring out some themes of his career as we go along. Okay, so first up, we're going to talk about his debut feature, The Man from Hong Kong, made in 1975, right in the height, the burgeoning of the Ozploitation boom in the 1970s, where censorship restrictions in Australia have been lifted in the late 60s, early 70s, leading to a rise in independent filmmaking, where slightly more risque types of films, genre types of films are being made way more than had been previously made. Yeah, what are your thoughts on the initial boom of Ozploitation there, Darrell?
Well, Brian was part of that, as you say, and yeah, I mean, we could really do a whole podcast on the Oz thing, and as I say, Not Quite Hollywood sort of covers it really nicely. But people will know stuff like Mad Max and the Peter Weir films and so on. And then Brian comes along. He's been around in the film business for some years by then, but never had a chance to make a feature film. And then suddenly in the mid-70s, after everybody else has done one, he's sort of quite late to the party, really. But he comes in with The Man from Hong Kong and blows everyone away. It's a stone cold 10 out of 10 classic for me.
Oh wow,
love it.
Okay, well, because he kind of got his start, bizarrely, shooting documentaries about other Ozploitation films.
That's right. Yeah. Well, yeah. Even before that, if you go back to the late 60s and around 1970, he was cutting trailers for movies. He did a whole load of Hammer horror trailers around 1969, 1970, and he did the trailer for The Italian Job and the trailer for The Virgin Soldiers and the trailer for Once Upon a Time in the West. And about 100 different movie trailers. And then, as you say, got into this business of making what we now think of as being sort of DVD or Blu-ray extras. And I guess he was making these little films to be shown on Australian TV to sort of promote movies. But they were very similar to what you'd now get on a Blu-ray.
Yeah, it's quite interesting you say that about the trailers thing, because it does, that sort of like being at the sales pitch end of the industry to start off with, obviously had a major influence on the types of movies that he made and how he went about constructing his productions.
Exactly. That really, that's one thing about Brian, that really does feed into his own movies, and you can tell that when you know that he was a trailer cutter and you watch one of his films. you get both of those things. You get the speed and the great editing and so on, but you get the ballyhoo as well. You get the promotion. You get the subject matter that's going to sell itself. And I think that trailer thing was very important in his career.
Okay, so let's move on to this 10 out of 10 stone cold classic, The Man from Hong Kong. I'm not quite sure I agree with that, but
okay, you've got another favourite Brian film, I'm sure, but this is my favourite, and I'm going to pitch Brian here. I'm going to be outrageous and say he's the Orson Welles of Ozploitation.
Okay.
I've only got two reasons for saying that. It doesn't hold water at all. His debut feature film is his masterpiece. Even though he made great films later on, he never quite sort of hit the mark of The Man from Hong Kong again. And then the second thing is, wouldn't Orson Welles have killed to have made a film called The Man from Hong Kong? What a Wellesian title that is. The film's nothing like it, but what would Welles have done with a title like that? But he never did. Brian did, and what a film.
One of the titles is The Dragon Flies as well, isn't it?
Yeah, which is great. Again, when you see the movie, that sums up in 3 words what you're going to see on screen, really, in all kinds of ways.
Yeah, so this movie stars Jimmy Wang Yu, who was a major star in Hong Kong cinema in the late 60s, early 70s. He was the One-Armed Swordsman, which was his first big film, which spawned 2 official sequels and a whole number of unofficial sequels from that. And he also had a hit called The Chinese Boxer. So it was only natural that when he'd had a falling out with the Hong Kong studio that produced One-Armed Swordsman, he went off and did a movie called One-Armed Boxer, combining 2 of his favorite hits. He was famous, I said late 60s, early 70s at the Shaw Brothers studio, making those Hong Kong samurai movies. He started slightly to wane a little bit by 1975, I guess, in the wake of Bruce Lee coming along and much more accomplished martial artists around that period had come along and slightly stolen his spotlight a little bit. So we get to 1975. Brian Trenchard-Smith had done a deal with a TV company to make a film called Kung Fu Killers with stuntman Grant Page, who we will come along on to next.
We will.
So they were making a documentary on kung fu movies in Hong Kong, and there he sort of got the connections with Golden Harvest, Raymond Chow. That's where the funding and the links and the connections, and George Lazenby was under contracts on a 3-picture deal with Golden Harvest at that time. So they managed to get George Lazenby in The Man from Hong Kong.
James Bond himself, the one and only James Bond.
Well, yeah, he was the first new Bond, I guess.
Yeah.
He's the new Coke of James Bond's. Yeah, but he wasn't that long ago from doing that role. I mean, it was only like 1969.
Yeah.
On Her Majesty's Secret Service. So it was only 5-6 years after shooting Bond, being Bond.
I suppose the point to make there is the fallout from that was still very sort of in the air, and he was still a bit of an industry joke, really, and wasn't getting masses of work. So
no, he hadn't done much. He'd done the Aldo Lado movie, Who Saw Her Die.
Who Saw Her Die, which is great, brilliant giallo. Yeah,
he'd done that in 1972, but again, just been kicking around, not really doing much, and didn't seem to want to do much as well.
Yeah.
Reading a little bit about him, he seemed to be quite an arrogant, I don't care kind of attitude, giving up Bond and all that kind of stuff.
What's notable about him in Man from Hong Kong is he plays the chief villain, the Mr. Big character in the film. And it's like the greatest Bond villain you never saw. It's almost like he shouldn't have been cast as James Bond. He should have played the bad guy, because he's fantastic in this as that kind of character.
Yeah, he's full of arrogant menace,
and just sits in this huge pad drinking whiskey and stuff and waiting for things to happen, and sort of ordering his henchmen around. And then getting involved in the big confrontation at the end. It's fabulous, and it's Bond fans would love it, even if you didn't like him as JB. Any James Bond fan watching this would really groove on seeing seeing Mr. Lazenby here playing the other side of the coin.
Okay, so the basic plot of The Man from Hong Kong is Jimmy Wang Yu plays a Hong Kong cop, the man from Hong Kong, who's coming to Sydney to extradite a cocaine dealer, a cocaine smuggler, played by the infamous Sammo Hung.
With a great hairstyle.
He looks fantastic, doesn't it, in this movie? Yeah, he obviously went on to be a major star in Hong Kong cinema. But here, early doors for Sammo Hung in this movie. He gets assassinated fairly early in the movie, and Jimmy Wang Yu stays around to try and track down the man responsible, George Lazenby's Aussie crime boss, Jack Wilton. So that's a basic plot. So why is it a 10 out of 10 movie, Darrell? Come on.
Well, for me, it's just an astounding parade of stunt work with Grant Page and all the other guys involved, car chases, martial arts set pieces, kung fu fighting, hang gliding, thrilling hang gliding sequences, and just non-stop action. It's all set to this bouncy light pop soundtrack. The theme tune, people who were around in the 70s will know it was a big hit in Britain in the 70s. Sky High by Jigsaw. What a tune.
Oh man, that song has been playing in my head for like days since I watched that movie again.
And for people that are into their Ozploitation, it's got everybody in it. You'll see people like Hugh Keaysburn and Frank Thring in it, who people will know from the Mad Max franchise and so much other Aussie cinema. Grant Page is in, as we've mentioned 3 times already, sort of heading the stunt team, and all the stunt guys doing absolutely incredible work. So yeah, it just moves along at an incredible pace. It's got action scene after action scene, absolutely non-stop. And I don't think the Australian film industry had ever seen anything quite like it. And it really, really holds up today. You know, I watched it again yesterday. Oh, it's as good as ever, you know.
I mean, what struck me about it was it's definitely got set pieces where you think, okay, that's the gritty British crime set piece. That's the action set piece. I mean, like nowadays, you can't walk up Ayers Rock, but in 1975, you could have a major action set piece on Ayers Rock.
You could do kung fu on there,
exactly. Yeah, that was a great. I mean, that again, in the way of summing up Trenchard-Smith's attitude towards cinema, it appears to be anyway, putting the money on the screen as much as possible really stands out in this movie. It's like, what do we have in Australia? We've got Ayers Rock, right? We'll have a action set piece in Ayers Rock. We've got Sydney Opera House, right? We'll bang that in there multiple times, and they really try and maximise the things that they've got that are going to be great production values on screen.
Yeah, exactly. And this is the thing about Brian's cinema as a whole, I think. Certainly if you watch his early Australian films, he loves Sydney in the way that Martin Scorsese loves New York. Never, ever misses a chance to show off Sydney Opera House, the great landmarks around the city, both natural and man-made, great rock formations, the lovely sort of coastal beauty. You know, there's all the scenes with yachts and hang gliders and helicopters flying out over the ocean and so on. And yeah, you're right, he really, really does use what he's got around him. This is great advice for young, low-budget filmmakers, is use what you've got around you. Brian just happened to have Sydney Opera House around him.
Well, this was a really well-shot movie as well. I mean, the cinematographer, Russell Boyd, went on to win an Oscar for Master and Commander 30 years later. You know, it was a brilliantly shot movie. Yeah, it's great. I mean, and Brian obviously worked very, very well alongside his DPs, because throughout his cinema, his use of CinemaScope is amazing. You know, and again, really adds production value just by using the widescreen. Gives his skill in using that widescreen image lends the films another, you know, $1 million worth of production for nothing, you know. And the colours that he uses, often shot scenes in very bright light,
with very vivid colours. Some of that natural, you know, you're in Australia, you're in Sydney, the sky's going to be yellow with sunshine, the sea is going to be bright blue, you're going to have lovely sort of greenery in the parks and so on. So Sydney and his Aussie locations almost do the job for him, but then he can add in sort of reds and purples and things in the costumes, in the props and in the vehicles, and seem to really work very, very well with his cameramen. And it all added to sort of enhance the overall sort of feel of the films, and again make them look more expensive than they were.
I think the film loses its way a little bit as it goes along. I think there's two things that really hold it back for being a 10 out of 10 for me. Is I don't think Jimmy Wang Yu is that charismatic as the lead. He's playing this sort of like James Bondy, seducer of women, action star, and he's not quite that charismatic enough to pull it off, I don't think.
I've got a sort of rejoinder to that. I think you're right. But if you think Jackie Chan went over to Australia about 20 years later, and he did very much the same sort of thing that Jimmy does in this film, and I think he's as good as Jackie Chan. You know, he's a fish out of water really, and he's going to struggle. But what happens is the rest of the cast sort of pull together to build up his character. They all talk about him and act around him as though he's this great charismatic figure, and it sort of works for me, you know. And the sort of alien qualities of him being in this strange land, you know, does lend itself to the way he sort of plays the part, whether by accident or design. I think it sort of works in his favour. He and the rest of the cast sort of turn round any deficiencies. I'm just trying to keep up that 10 out of 10 rating here, but
my other little quibble with it was like, I think the love interest gets brought in a bit too late in the plot.
Yeah, but then what happens again there in the structure of the plot is he meets up with another woman as soon as he gets off the plane to Australia. You know, he's having all these sort of affairs. Yeah, but the big love of his life does sort of come in late on. But I think again that's excusable because of what's happened earlier in the film. And you've seen him sort of interacting with other characters.
Yeah. Well, I suppose they do establish their love affair via a wonderful montage sequence that gets everything we need to know about.
Well, this is the one lull in the action. You're almost expecting them to beat each other up, you know, because it's the only scene in the film where no one's fighting.
But it was kind of like, we don't need to do dialogue scenes where we enhance the depth of the characters. Whack it all in a montage.
Oh, yeah.
And by the end of that, they're in love. They've always been in love, and they're in love forever.
Yeah. 10 out of 10.
So they're two of my criticisms of the movie, but help you bring it back up to a 10 out of 10 here. Two great sequences in that I found absolutely fantastic. The fight scene in the lift shaft.
Brilliant.
Was really brilliant, and it felt unique. It felt interesting. It felt like I've genuinely not seen this before, and it was really well done.
Yeah, you do sort of find yourself thinking as it's unfolding, you know, and he's in the lift, and you think obviously someone's going to get in there with him. There's going to be 3 guys in there with him. This will be interesting. They'll have a fight. No, something different happens, and it changes the whole dynamic of the scene. And then, as you say, we get to a point where we're getting something that I don't think had been done before.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great sequence. Yeah, and the other sequence was the long chase sequence when he's chasing down the assassin.
Yeah.
Which has got a little bit of sort of like parkour kind of style action sequence where they're running on foot, then they're on bikes, then they're running on. It's just a crazy sequence.
Well, you know, this is the point where, you know, you've got to look very, very closely at what you're watching, and you'll probably spot Grant Page in a wig several times, you know, because one of his great fortes was sort of climbing up the outside of buildings and so on. So any time you see any action like that, and it's supposed to be Jimmy, or it's meant to be one of the henchmen or Lazenby or someone involved, look very closely and you'll probably see it's one of the stuntmen in a wig. But that's all part of the film's charm, you know, and the stunts. Well, you shouldn't be looking that closely on your first viewing, because you should just be sitting there with your mouth open in awe at the chases and the stunts and the fights. They're incredible.
And I think the variety of the action sequences in this movie really, really help elevate it. You have that sort of like gritty British crime chase through the streets of Sydney, fighting in a Chinese restaurant action sequence. You've got that close-up fight in the lift shaft.
Yeah.
You have the martial arts on top of Ayers Rock.
Brilliant. Yeah.
And then you've got like a really extended stunt driving car chase sequence towards the end of the movie as well.
Do you know what's really great about the action scenes and the fight scenes? Jimmy gets hurt in them. His character gets hurt. He gets chopped to pieces like everyone else. You know, he's stumbling out of those fights, covered in scars and gashes and blood pouring everywhere. It's not like watching a Tom Cruise movie or something. This guy's getting hurt. The character's getting hurt, you know. And there's a great scene in the film where he has this fight with sort of swords and machetes, where he's taking on about 5 other guys, you know, and he beats them all and leaves them all in a bloody pulp on the floor of this gym. And then he sort of stumbles out, and you think, oh, he's going off to lick his wounds, and 2 other guys turn up. It's great, and you just don't know where this film's going to go with scenes like that. But yeah, I'm really impressed with the fact that they have their hero looking sort of weak and in pain at times. You know, he's not this invincible sort of Superman. He can get hurt, and he is vulnerable.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's definitely got that sort of like Bruce Willis in Die Hard.
Yeah,
he wears his scars as he goes along the movie, doesn't he?
Sure.
Let's move on to our next film. Brian did another movie called Death Cheaters. But the movie we're going to talk about next is Stunt Rock, an odd movie, if I'm honest.
Yeah, it is odd.
And feels very much of its time.
Brian says it's the worst film he ever made. I don't agree,
Okay.
but he doesn't like it himself. But I think it's a film that if you know what you're watching, and if you probably need to do a bit of research, you maybe need to listen to this podcast and watch a couple of Brian's other movies before you approach Stunt Rock. But once you've got that little bit of background knowledge, it's a lot of fun. Tarantino is a huge fan of Brian Trenchard-Smith.
Yeah.
And I think that Stunt Rock is sort of equates in Tarantino's career to Death Proof, in that Tarantino would work with Zoe Bell as a stunt person on a number of films. And he obviously loved Zoe so much that he thought, we need to give this lady a vehicle. If not her own movie, then a film that has got big chunks of her in it, being able to do her stuff, you know. And if that was his thinking on Death Proof, this is the film where he got that idea, because it's Brian's love letter to Grant Page.
It does feel like a very 70s movie in the sense that, you know, you had like some like Evel Knievel being famous for doing Daredevil stunts, and then he got his own movie. Yeah, and this kind of feels a little bit like that. Grant Page had a little bit of a name for himself as a pioneering stuntman.
But it's so weird. It's sort of part documentary, it's part fiction, and then you've got the half of the movie is nothing to do with Grant. It's about this sort of proto-Spinal Tap outfit called, with the great name, Sorcery. What a name for a metal band, you know. And they live up to that because they come out on stage, and they're in the film because they sort of know Grant, and one of them's supposed to be related to him or something, and they're hanging around with the actress from the movie that he's working on, and the girl reporter who's sort of covering the shoot, and they all go off and see this band rehearsing or doing gigs every so often. So about half the movie's made up of Sorcery live footage, and it's great because they're called Sorcery, and the reason is when they turn up on stage, they've got this guy called the Prince of Darkness with them, and they've got this sort of Merlin type wizard, and they're throwing fire at each other, fireballs, and firing flames out of their fingertips at each other while the band play around them. So, and this takes up about 50% of this movie that's supposed to be about this stuntman. It's just bizarre.
Yeah, I mean, I wrote down like plot for this movie, and I've literally put not much of one. It's basically Grant Page moving to America to be the lead stunt guy on this TV show called Danger Girl, headlined by Monique van der Ven, who a Dutch actress who ended up, I know her from the Dick Maas movie Amsterdam.
Yes,
she was the lead character in that. So she's headlining, playing a version of herself in this. But Grant's there to be the stunt guy for this show. He starts romancing this journalist, Lois, who's played by Margaret Gerard, who ends up being Dr. Margaret Trenchard-Smith. There's a nice link to Brian there. It's his wife. So and that's literally it. This is slight romance, and that's it. There's not really much to hang your hat on. It just links between high-profile stunts in split screens of these daredevil stunts, man-on-wire style.
As I said, Brian's great at using CinemaScope. You do get the impression with this one that he's recently seen a couple of Brian De Palma films.
So it assembles this movie where, as you're watching it, it's fine. It moves relatively swiftly from music piece to stunt piece to a little bit of drama, and you've got this sleazy agent guy, and you've got these different characters. And you get to the end of the movie, and you think, oh, that's it. There's not really anything that makes the movie a movie in some way.
Yeah. It's sort of like a 90-minute Blu-ray extra, but it's the sort of thing that used to play on the bottom half of double bills back in the old days of double bills around the time it came out. This would have been great, if you'd gone to see that playing before Smokey and the Bandit or something, it'd look brilliant. And Hal Needham, who was involved with Burt Reynolds and all the Smokey films and everything, Hal Needham's cinema at that time was all about trying to promote the idea of stunts as being a sort of integral part of his movies. And then, of course, what he had, I think in the same year as this, was Richard Rush doing The Stuntman, a sort of art movie style, very critically acclaimed, very sort of philosophical, symbolic sort of piece about the stunt industry. And so you've got all this stuff with Richard Rush's film and with Hal Needham's career going on. And maybe Brian...
Yeah, it was definitely the idea of the stuntman was in the ether, wasn't it, around that period? Because you had, like you say, you had the the stunt movies of Hal Needham, Smokey and the Bandit.
So it was almost trying to set these guys up as like mythical, godlike figures of the movies, and it was this weird little sort of blip in film history where everybody for 5 minutes wanted to celebrate the stuntmen.
I think the other thing that makes what this feels like to me, it feels like a clip show from a long-running TV series.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, very much.
We got to 500 episodes. Here's a clip from Mad Dog Morgan. Here's a clip from Mad Max.
That's it. And you are actually getting these clips. They use clips from other films in it. So
I think it's all about Grant Page, and Grant Page was a key figure in that Australian Ozploitation movie. Was the stunt coordinators on, like Mad Dog Morgan, man from Hong Kong, obviously. Patrick, the coma patient, telekinesis coma patient movie, great movie. He was Mad Max, the original Mad Max. He was on Road Games. He played the actual bad guy in Road Games. So he was front and center in that whole movement.
One of those guys who was a really good stuntman, but was a great actor as well. He could actually handle acting roles, which is always useful to a director.
We're going to jump a few years now. Obviously, Brian carried on shooting a few more movies in between all this, but we're going to move to his movie called Turkey Shoot.
Wow.
Known in America as Escape 2000 and unknown in this country, in the UK, as the wonderfully exploitative title Blood Camp Thatcher.
And that one came from Mike Lee at Vipco Films, one of our favourite labels, because there is a male character called Thatcher in the movie. So
he's the main villain in the movies. Is Charles Thatcher, not Margaret Thatcher.
No, but Mike Lee led you to believe it was on the box. So you'd rent the film expecting you were going to get some kind of weird Maggie impersonation, and you get this big macho villain instead. But yeah, Turkey Shoot, what a film. 9 out of 10, this one.
This is another version basically of The Most Dangerous Game.
Yes, it is. It
seems to be one every 10-15 years. Somebody else makes a new version of The Most Dangerous Game. More recent examples being things like Battle Royale, The Hunger Games.
The Hunt that came out just a few months ago, just before lockdown. Yeah.
There you go.
So it's still very current,
I think it'll always will be. I think it's one of those ideas.
Yeah, but this came out 82, and it was probably I'd sort of pitched the golden era of exploitation cinema, probably from the mid 50s through to about 1982. Films were still being made after 1982 with exploitative subject matter, horror films, sort of science fiction, all the sort of comic book stuff that we love. Something seemed to change at the end of 1982, and what you stopped getting was that type of movie where you were watching them and you simply did not know what was coming next, and you didn't know which genres were going to be sort of mashed together. And Brian does that here. This is the great last gasp, I think, of that kind of movie, because it is the most dangerous game, but it's mixed with a sort of women in prison style. It's not exactly a women in prison movie, it's a sort of mixed prison, but it's got that women in prison subgenre sort of feel to it. The exploitation prison, it's not a real prison, it's a movie prison, where anything can happen, where the guards are sadistic, where the governors are even more sadistic. And you've also got this dystopian science fiction sort of element to it. So it's this sort of genre mashup with the human hunting, most dangerous game plot sort of shunted into it. And boy, does it all work brilliantly.
Yeah, so the basic plot is it's set in this totalitarian future where people who don't agree with the usual, the governmental view are called deviants and are held in rehabilitation camps. A prisoner played by Steve Railsback from The Stuntman, and a wrongly accused prisoner played by Olivia Hussey from Romeo and Juliet.
Yeah, so big names.
They team up to survive this decadent oppressors game of death that's put on, where they're involved in a 12-hour hunt and they have to survive 12 hours out in the open. So we've got Steve Railsback fresh off. I mean, literally, the Stuntman was 1980, so he'd have been fresh off an Oscar-nominated movie.
Yeah, and we're sort of critically red hot at the time, and because of that film. And then he ends up working with the guy who made Stunt Rock. So
it does seem an odd choice. I mean, it's not, for me, it's not odd because I don't think he's much of an actor, Steve Railsback. And even in The Stuntman, I don't think he's very good. And maybe that's the industry thought, yeah, he's not going to be the guy to kick off.
Could be.
Even by 1981-82, he was being offered movies like Turkey Shoot.
Yeah. But then, Brian's the kind of guy that will come in and hoover people like that up and say, okay, Hollywood doesn't want you, but your last film got Oscar nominated, and every critic in the world loved it. So I if nobody else wants to work with you, I will, and
yeah. And there was a big boom in Australian cinema around that period. There was a lot of fairly big names going down to Australia.
Yeah.
And shooting movies. You got people like David Hemmings was involved in this movie, wasn't he?
Some like him sort of made careers there and went out and lived there for a few years, and there's one guy that I'm going to talk about a little later on, actually. But it was a thing that go to Australia. Their movie industry is sort of really flowering. Let's make movies there. I think it was a case of other local industries. Certainly, the UK film industry was sort of starting to dry up a little bit, and it was right. We've still got this drive. We want to make movies. We can't do them at home. In Britain or in certain parts of America or in certain parts of Europe. Let's go over to where we can make them, and Australia was the place.
The style of the productions there were built around Australian casts with American or UK leads headlining the movie, I guess, to help international sales.
Yeah.
Olivia Hussey as well. I mean, she'd done some fairly big stuff.
Yeah, but again, she was a sort of a nearly woman, sort of. She was a sort of might have been. She peaked very early in her career, and then sort of rather drifted through the 70s, and I don't think too many people even know who she is now, but very interesting career, quite a long career for an actress. I mean, she was working, she was in one of the Psycho sequels, wasn't she? So she went right up to the 90s, and didn't maybe have the career that she might have dreamed of, but I think looking back on what she did, some very interesting films across quite a long period. And Turkey Shoot is a really stands out on her filmography as like, what's that doing there? But she's great in it. She throws herself into it, and
so this is a 9 out of 10 for you.
I think so. Yeah, it's just a notch down from Man from Hong Kong, but it is great, and it is really the sort of last film of its kind for me as well. In that. People were still making films like that later, and then people like Troma came along soon after, and you had things like Empire Pictures and Charles Band and stuff, but it wasn't quite the same. Turkey Shoot was the last of these films where it was almost made specifically to play in grindhouses and on 42nd Street, and it does have that quality of what on earth is going to happen next. I mean, it's most famous for having this weird, what is he, a sort of werewolf ape-man sort of stunted sort of character who comes in covered in hair and
yeah, I was going to ask you about that, Darrell.
Appears in the middle of scenes for no reason whatsoever, you know, and you don't sort of really know why this sort of monster's suddenly in the film, you know.
All these sort of like decadent hunters are bringing out their latest weapons, and this decadent woman's got this arrow firing gun thing and specific rifle barrel, and then this guy goes, yeah, I've got this fella here, a gigantic werewolf. What? There's no explanation why. Why? Basically, why? But there it is.
Yeah, and the film is incredibly gory, but it is so in a cartoony sort of way. It's not offensive to any. You know, at the time, of course, there was loads and loads of censorship all over the world in terms of horror and what were called splatter movies. Any film where people's sort of arms and legs were being lopped off, you know, was having frames of the film lopped off as well by the censors. And this movie really, if anyone said they were offended by this, I'd be amazed, because it's just a romp. It's arms and legs being chopped off in the way that they were in Monty Python and the Holy Grail. You know, it's that kind of thing. It's done for fun.
It didn't feel like its heart was in it when it came to the gore.
Oh, I don't know.
No, in a sense of like, it wasn't going for that. This is going to really repulse you. And
but I don't think he intended to. As I say, I think his intention was to have a laugh with it, you know, and he does, and that conveys to the audience.
Well, Turkey Shoot falls a little bit further down for me. I'm not in the 9 out of 10. I'm more in the 7 out of 10 for me. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I thought it was a good romp. I did think that the two leads for me let it down. He just wasn't very charismatic as a freedom fighter, leader of the rebellion style character. I don't think anyone would band behind Steve Rails back in this movie. And I think Olivia Hussey was a bit too much of a wet fish. Yeah, just like grow a backbone sooner than the last 5 minutes of the movie.
Yeah. For me, you know, I'm enjoying the film so much as I'm watching it that I if there are flaws, I try and sort of see the good in them. And what I did with Turkey Shoot with those characters, they are fairly weak, but I sort of say, well, they're almost like real people, you know. That's what I'd be like if I was in that prison, you know. And so, you know, I sort of give them a lot of leeway because I'm enjoying the rest of the film and this mad werewolf thing and all the great weapons and stuff. I'm loving all that so much that I tend to forgive any sort of weak spots or try and excuse them and find a reason why they're there. You know, I always have a blast with Turkey Shoot. It's a film that I watch quite often.
Fair enough. Okay, well, let's move on to our next movie, because it could be argued that Brian Trenchard-Smith throughout his career has appealed to a slightly more juvenile audience who wants action sequences, kick-ass heroes, that kind of thing. He went one further with his next movie after Turkey Shoot.
This is the one that people might have heard of.
That's right. Yeah, I mean, this was a really big hit in the UK.
Yeah,
BMX Bandits.
BMX Bandits.
Yeah, I mean, this one is again a basic plot for those of you who don't know. It's 3 Sydney kids get embroiled in a caper over stolen walkie-talkies. A group of armed robbers who imported these walkie-talkies are after them, and obviously the only people that can stop them are a bunch of kids on bikes.
Most notable, of course, for featuring and starring, indeed, a young actress just starting out in her career, Nicole Kidman.
That's right, yeah.
And boy, doesn't the camera love her as well in this? I think you see her come on, and you know, it could be a retrospective thing. It could be that we know her, and we're sort of looking out for her and thinking, oh yeah, a chance to see Nicole Kidman in an early role. But I think it's more than that. I think if you'd seen that film at the time without knowing who she was, I think there's a charisma there and a screen presence. She's there with all the rest of the kids, and she's the one who stands out. She's very tall, of course, as we know, so maybe that little bit of height draws your eyes to her. I think there's a little star in the making there, you know.
Yeah, I think the reviews at the time were fairly sort of like, you know, it's not much of a great movie, you know, but it features a great performance by Nicole Kidman.
Yeah,
you know, it's like you do, a lot of the reviews are, but this performance was great.
Yeah, and I think it might have been a surprise as well that the young juvenile female in the film got a lot of the action and a lot of the dialogue and a lot of the camera attention. You know, normally you'd have this 2 guys, 1 girl set up, and she'd be like the girlfriend of one of the guys, or they'd be fighting over her, but she'd be a sort of background figure. She'd be one of the gang sort of thing, and one of the guys would be the lead character. And here it really doesn't play like that.
No, I mean there is a moment. There is a moment in the movie where she gets kidnapped.
Yes, yeah.
And you think, okay, this is the bit where it's going to be, oh, the damsel in distress.
They come in and rescue her. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's completely not. She sits there and basically conducts a plan to effect her own escape by spinning this crazy yarn. Obviously, this movie's particularly structured in a way for teenagers, for kids. This is one of the movies that kind of crystallizes Brian Trenchard-Smith, in the sense that it's a commercial movie. It's exploitation in the sense of like it exploits the boom of BMX bikes.
Yeah, because we've had like roller disco movies and we've had skateboard movies, and this was like the next trend to come along. So yeah,
and think how big BMXs were huge in the early 80s, late 70s, early 80s. The fact that there's not more movies made about this is astonishing, really.
It is. I wonder if with that, you know, they sort of thought, well, there've been all these millions of BMX bikes sold, you know, let's tap into that audience and make a movie about it. And then, as you say, it was a hit. But I wonder if the industry looked at the figures on BMX Bandits and thought, well, maybe it's not quite been the mega hit that we wanted. And could that be down to the fact that all these people on bikes go out on their bikes, they don't go and watch films, you know. It's a bit like the gaming industry now, you know, people wonder why, you know, you can't really make a hit movie out of a computer game, and it's because the audience you're trying to aim that at isn't interested.
I mean, yeah, possibly. I mean, for me, it's more easily explained by this is an independent movie.
Yeah,
it can move quicker than a studio picture. So that's why a lot of these sort of like mini fads, trends, crazes, it's usually an independent movie that capitalizes on that audience.
Yeah.
Because by the time the studios get their finger out and make a movie, the craze is already gone.
Well, they're having 20 meetings about making the film. You know, let's do BMX2 at Warner Brothers. You know, and after 18 months of meetings, the fad's passed. Yeah.
Perfect example of this is BMX Bandits in 1983. 1983 released in 1984. You had Hal Needham did a BMX movie called Rad.
Yeah,
which didn't come out until 86. And that was a studio's movie. So, you know, it was TriStar Pictures. So you had that slow process. And by the time it came out in 86, absolutely bombed because no one really was talking about it. It wasn't the fresh, hot thing. Whereas BTS struck while the iron was hot.
As we're calling him. Yeah.
Well, I am now. BTS. As he made the movie, released the movie, rates in the profits of the movie. Apparently, this movie, I mean, according to him, on his, there's not really many figures from the UK box office from the early 80s that are published. BTS says that this movie made over £1 million at the UK box office, which puts it like fairly high up. That puts it alongside.
That was big money at the time.
Well, Conan the Destroyer made 1.2 million at the UK box office. So it's like that kind of level of movie for what was shot on probably £50, you know. Yeah,
I mean, you know, the sort of film where you would have had to queue up outside the Odeon to get in. You know, you couldn't have just walked in and got a ticket.
I think it's a fun film. It definitely feels like it's got a feel of a children's film foundation.
Yeah. This is one thing I wanted to talk about, Adam, is that it does have that. But it's then got this other element to it in terms of the villains, the bad guys. They're like something out of the Sweeney. encroaching on this Children Film Foundation world. You've got a very interesting actor called Brian Marshall, who he was another one of these guys, like we mentioned earlier, who'd gone over to Australia. His career in Britain seemed to sort of dry up. His last film in England was The Long Good Friday, which took a while to come out, which was indicative of what was happening in the industry at the time. That was made in 1979. It didn't come out for 2 years. Hard to believe now it's everyone's, favourite British gangster movie. But Brian was in that. But his career was obviously sort of starting to dry up a little bit around the end of the 70s. And so he was one of the guys who came over to Australia. This was the first movie that he did there. He made a string of films, all kinds of different films in Australia, and then got into TV. He even appeared in about 4 episodes of Neighbours on British TV over the years in the 60s and 70s. Brian he'd been very good at playing various sort of cops and law enforcement officials, but he could also flip and do the sort of Cockney gangster, the Cockney villain. And he plays that sort of part here. And he's got this gang. And in the opening scene, they do this bank heist. And they come in, they've all got blue boiler suits on, and they've got these horrible sort of weird pig masks on, and they've got their sawn-off shotguns, and they're blasting into the ceiling and threatening customers and so on, like it's an episode of The Sweeney. And then we go into these scenes that, as you say, are like something from the Children's Film Foundation. So it's a weird mix. And the villains do get a bit more comical and a bit more cartoony sort of later on in the film.
Yeah, they do tend to like go into more Ealing comedy kind of broad, sort of like they're baddies, but they're stupid.
But then the threat comes back occasionally. Every now and then, one of them says something, and you think, no, he's a real hard man. He's a hard man. When he says he's going to kill Nicole Kidman, or he's going to, murder the gang or whatever, you sort of believe it because of that opening scene and because of the way that Brian Marshall's playing. So yeah, it's this weird hybrid of Children's Film Foundation and The Sweeney,
which is great for me. That sounds great.
If that doesn't sell you a ticket, what will?
Yeah, I mean, this movie for me. When this came out in '84, I was like 6 or 7. And it became a staple of my viewing habits in the 80s. There's some nice stunt work from Nicole Kidman as well. Totally not an 18-year-old bloke in a wig. Okay, cool. So moving on to our final film in this Brian Trenchard-Smith Odyssey, Dead End Driving, 1986. I guess at what you were calling it, the fag end of the exploitation boom.
Yeah. Well, it's 1986, and boy, does it show. It's brash, it's day glow. Everyone's got sort of tutus, leather jackets, mohawks, eye makeup, face makeup. All very garish and colourful. But again, it's got this dystopian plot.
Yeah. So the plot is set in a dystopian future Australia, where the naughty youth, are dealt with by trapping them in a drive-in movie theatre, which is effectively a concentration camp for teenagers. They're fed a steady diet of junk food, drugs, new wave music, and exploitation films. That sounds fantastic. But equally, a gilded cage is still a cage. A couple of interesting things about this movie. Yeah. It's based on a short story by two-time Booker Prize-winning author Peter Carey. So, highbrow writer here, and it's very much contemporary, as you say, new wave haircuts, punk haircuts, seemingly shallow, but I think there's probably a lot of depth there.
Yeah, it's got something to say. It's a very political movie when you delve into it. Yeah. What's interesting about it for me is that, again, it's like we were just saying about the stunt thing and the way there was this sort of cult of the stuntman around sort of 1980. This film taps into something else that was in the ether, which, if you think about Stephen King's The Mist, or you think about the two Joe Lansdale drive-in books, The Drive-In and The Drive-In 2, this fits right in alongside those, in that what you're getting is a situation where in Lansdale's books it's even a drive-in, it's the same as the BTS film, but Stephen King's The Mist has its characters shut in a supermarket. And what you've got there is all of these things came out around the same time, all within about 4 or 5 years of each other. And you've got this idea that let's trap our characters in a known place, a known venue, a place that's supposed to be happy and entertaining and a leisure space, you know, and we're going to put the lid on that. We're going to keep 30 people in there, and then we're going to see what happens to them and treat it as like a microcosm of society, a microcosm of the world, you know.
Yeah, it's definitely has mirrors to our single location movie podcast that we did a couple of podcasts ago. But it has that eye of trapping them in there, creating this microcosm of society within the boundaries of this drive-in. Obviously, in Australia, it was mainly, I mean, in this film, it deals with like tensions, racial tensions between the white Caucasian Australians and Asian immigrants coming into Australia, and the tensions between that in there. And I think he does it really well and really subtly, yeah, and effectively, I think. There's a great line in it where the lead character that you've been following all the way through kind of accepts her, I guess, accepts her status as being living in this is where she lives now, where she talks about the incoming Asian immigrants into the drive-in. And she says, I hope they don't let too many of them in. And it's just a little horrible line that just says, yeah, that's what's happened.
Oh yeah, that's a punch.
It is. It really is.
Yeah, the only other thing to mention for me about the film is the little snippet that apparently it's Quentin Tarantino, that guy again, it's Tarantino's favourite BTS movie.
I think he said, actually, Darrell, it's his favourite Australian movie. I think he said it was his favourite Australian movie, which... That's a bold claim. I think it's his favourite BTS movie, but I think it's his favourite.
To say it's Brian's best film is something, considering the 9s and 10s I've been dishing out, you know. But the best Australian movie, that's comparing it to Mad Max and Patrick and all our other favourites, you know.
Picnic at Hanging Rock, Waking Fright, you know. It's like
well.
Yeah, I'm just gonna check that quote, make sure I'm right here. He does tend to deal in those sort of like definitive statements, doesn't he? QT.
Yeah. And he means them.
Oh no, sorry, no, I apologise. His favourite film from Brian Trenchard-Smith.
Yeah, I mean, to bring stunts back into it as well. There's some amazing car stunts in. There's one where a Chevy flies about 150 feet through the air, driven by not Grant Page this time, but by a stuntman called Grant Norris, who was a veteran of the Mad Max films, and boy, does it show when he flies that car.
Looking at BTS's career, this does feel like the last of a certain type of movie that he was making.
Yeah.
And I think after that, he doesn't really kind of... I mean, is there anything after Dead End Driving that you would single out as...
Oh, well, there isn't really. There's one other film I do want to mention before we go, but what happens then is he goes to Hollywood in the 90s, you know, 1990s in America, and he's stayed there and he's made films over there. And I know you've been watching the Leprechaun franchise.
Recently. For my sins.
Yeah, and he does a couple of the sort of mid-series entries.
Yeah, arguably number 3 currently. I'm on number 6 is my next one, but he's directed the best one so far, number 3. Yeah, and it's like number 4 though. He directed number 4 as well, which is god awful.
Maybe did those back to back or something.
It's kind of weird because it says they're both shot on video, but number 3 doesn't look like it's shot on video, and number 4 looks like it's shot on the worst piece of video they could find. And I think one of the reasons why I wanted to do this podcast as a topic was I made the statement as I was watching it. Oh, it's Brian Trenchard-Smith. There's always something to enjoy in a Brian Trenchard-Smith movie. And I still stand by that statement.
There is, yeah.
Even in 4.
The last thing I want to mention is if people want to check out Brian Trenchard-Smith straight away, and if you want to go on YouTube or go to your DVD collection or whatever and see a little sample of his work, he won awards and prizes galore in 1978 for making a film called Hospitals Don't Burn Down. And it's 24 minutes long. It's a public information film. It's all about fire safety. And it's set in a hospital. And it's like a little mini towering inferno. It's great. It's a fantastic little drama made basically to show to sort of, you know, for fire chiefs to show to sort of firemen and women about what to do and not to do if you go to a burning building, you know. And Brian got the chance to direct it, and it's one of his best movies. It's 24 minutes long. If you've got the Blu-ray of Dead End Drive-In from Arrow, it's on there. If you don't buy Blu-rays, it's you can see it in slightly less quality on YouTube. So check out Hospitals Don't Burn Down, one of his best films.
I've not watched my extras on my Dead End Drive-In Deep Blu-ray yet, so I will check that out because I've not seen that one before.
Great documentary about stuntmen on there as well.
Cool, okay. Well, I might be in the right frame of mind to watch that now after watching Stunt Rock.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. So as I say, looking at the rest of his career, I mean, I recently watched one of the Panther movies from the mid-80s, which he made just after Dead End Drive-In, Day of the Panther and Strike of the Panther. They shot back to back. Very enjoyable, juvenile action sequences that seemingly only the 80s could do. Yeah. So should we wrap it up there with BTS? I want to actually one final thing I would do want to plug actually. Not plug, but like just talk about who Brian Trenchard. He directed a film called Drive Hard about 6 years ago, and he just seems to have slowed down in the last 6 years. But he's been working on trying to get scripts made. He's sold a couple of films and they've not been made. And he's turned one of them into a novel, which is available to buy on Kindle on Amazon right now. It's like a genre mashup where Alice from Alice in Wonderland wakes up in an insane asylum and keeps flashing back to 16th century England. Alice Through the Multiverse, it's called. So I want to single out this book that Brian's been just recently published last year, I believe. Oh, Alice Through the Multiverse.
If anyone's got a spare book token knocking around and they're looking for something to spend it on, BTS.
It's not that expensive on Kindle. It's like £2.30, something like that. So you know, it's not super expensive, but it has got that genre mashup feel to it that
he's always done so well, going right back to the start. Yeah,
exactly. So you can read BTS in prose. Great stuff. Thank you very much, Darrell. We'll hook up and meet again for another podcast fairly soon. Hope everyone's enjoyed today. I just want to thank Quad and BFI for supporting these podcasts. So hopefully we'll see you all soon.
Yeah, thanks for listening.